The Black Hollow Parsonage had not known footsteps in decades. Its floorboards groaned like tired lungs, taking in the weight of men who came with crowbars and clipboards, not to worship, but to tear down what remained of consecrated rot. The bell tower had collapsed during a storm years before. Moss drank from the stone walls. Wind carried only silence through the nave. It was April 1972, when they arrived with their hard hats and polite indifference. They did not speak of ghosts, only of mold, fire damage, and the cost of salvaging timber. The chapel's roof had buckled, the pews eaten hollow. Still, when the first worker stepped into the sacristy, he paused, unprompted, as though the air had thickened around him. The others would later say he stared too long at the crucifix above the recessed alcove, not with reverence, but suspicion. The wooden Christ hung crooked, one arm sagging from a rusted nail, as though halfway through. Letting go. They pulled it down, not with violence, but with a carefulness none of them could explain. It came free in a gasp of dust and splinter. Behind it, not stone, but plaster. And set within the plaster, barely visible beneath soot and time, was a rectangle the size of a child's hand. A letter, sealed in wax the color of dried marigolds. No name, no address. No markings but a trembling script, barely legible. If you find this, do not dig further. She breathed still. It was Harold. Kemper who read it aloud. He was not a man of imagination. 48, twice divorced, and fond of radio baseball. The others joked that he didn't believe in anything, not even birthdays. But he stood silent after reading the letter, his hands trembling. He folded it, tucked it into his coat, and did not speak the rest of the day. By Wednesday, Harold had not returned. His foreman assumed a hangover, a habit, or worse. He sent a man to Harold's house at the edge of town. A door was ajar. Inside, the lights were off and the curtains drawn. No dishes in the sink, no movement. They found him in the bedroom, kneeling, not in prayer, but rigid, eyes wide. Open, his mouth was full. Torn hymnal pages, crammed so deep into his throat that they had to be removed with forceps. He was alive. But he never spoke again. Doctors called it catatonic dissociation, likely self-inflicted. The town called it something else, but not aloud. The demolition paused. A new team was hired. They did not know Harold. They did not ask questions. Yet something had shifted in the house. They resumed tearing down the wall, cautiously, like mourners rearranging bones. And behind that wall, another letter, this one brittle with mildew, its ink run like tears. It mentioned names that no one recognized. It spoke of children baptized without witness, of rites rewritten in whispers, of someone called only Mother A. She was not listed in church records. No photos, no servants, no dates. The letters continued. By the time they reached the northern wing of the parsonage, they had found 7. Each one more decayed than the last, but unmistakably part of a chain, a trail of breadcrumbs through a forest that no longer existed, and each letter ended with the same chilling invocation: do not dig further. Yet they did, not out of defiance, but inertia, the mechanical stubbornness of men paid by the hour. No one wanted to admit fear. No one wanted to admit guilt. But the air grew colder, not in degrees, but in sensation. The kind of cold that settled under the skin. Tools slipped more easily from hands. Nails bent. A ladder fell, twice. One man quit. 2 reported seeing figures through broken windows. Children, they claimed, barefoot and pale, though none could agree on the number. Still, the work continued. Until they uncovered the alcove. It was not listed in any blueprint. A small room, sealed behind lath and plaster. No door, only a bricked arch, crudely mortared. They found it by accident when one man's hammer struck hollow. The bricked wall crumbled easily. Behind it, dust. And then stillness. The alcove was no larger than a confessional. Its floor was bare. Its walls scratched. Symbols, circles, crosses turned sideways, letters inverted. But it was the ceiling that drew breath from the men's lungs. A child's handprint, in soot, repeating across every inch. Hundreds, perhaps more, dotted the center, a wooden chair. Upon it, one final letter, sealed in black wax. No words on. The front dot, they did not open it. No one would. The project was abandoned within the week. Officially, the site was deemed structurally unsound. In truth, the workers left mid-shift. Tools remained. The parsonage stood another 2 years before it burned in a controlled fire. But the town remembers quietly. Uneasily, the archive in Black Hollow's municipal building contains the incident report. It does not mention Harold's condition. It does not mention the child-sized alcove. It lists only discovered historical correspondences, anonymous in origin, returned to diocesan storage. But Sister Agnes knew. She had been a novice in the 1930s, barely 17, sent from the city to Black Hollow to learn service. She remembered the parsonage then, the silence, the rules, the unseen. She remembered Mother A, though she had never heard her voice. Only her songs, humming in the vestry, lullabies that ended on wrong notes. She was the one who had placed the crucifix back on the wall. The day she left out, no one asked why the plaster had already been disturbed. No one had ever asked where the other girls had gone. The first letter was a warning. The others were confessions. But one remains missing. The one she never sent, yet everyone feared. The one no hand dared write, but every wall remembered Dot, and so the silence begins to speak. They never recorded when Agatha Rook arrived. No train. Manifest, no church roster, no formal ordination. Only a footnote in the 1892 parish ledger of St. Augustine's Chapel, penned in a hand that shook. She has come. We are to receive her. Black Hollow was not a town that asked questions, especially not of the faithful. The chapel stood on the crest of a wooded rise, small, austere, and always damp. Rain clung to its shingles long after clouds had passed. Moss never stopped growing there. When the last ordained minister fell ill, he was not replaced. The church bell went silent. Services paused. Then, one Sunday, the chapel doors reopened, and she stood inside. Agatha Rook wore gray, not black like the sisters, not white like the brides of Christ. Just gray, homespun, frayed at the hem, smelling faintly of tobacco and lavender root. She stood at the base of the altar steps, never. Atop them, hands folded beneath her shawl. She never lifted her eyes, never read from Scripture. Yet no one left. They listened, not to words, but to presence. There was a hush around her, not reverence, but fear softened into obedience. The townspeople called it grace. The sisters called it something else, in private, unspoken authority. Sister Agnes was 15 then. Her novitiate had only just begun. She remembered that first service not by what was said, but what was felt. The candles remained unlit, the pulpit empty, yet each pew filled. No choir, no incense, only the creak of wood and the sound, the strange sound of breath holding still. Agatha never led a prayer, never performed a mass. But the sick were brought to her all the same. They arrived on foot or by horse-drawn cart, bundled in quilts in silence. Children burning with fever, men who could no longer rise, women whose hands trembled from loss. Agatha would lay a palm, always the left, never the right, to their brow or their sternum. She said nothing, but they stilled. Some recovered. Others simply stop suffering. She eases, the sisters would whisper. Not heals, just quiets. But quiet can be a kind of death. Not all were comforted. One girl, no more than 10, screamed when Agatha approached. Said her hand was cold like a pond in winter. That girl vanished from the town ledgers a year later. No burial, no departure. Just a blank line and a replacement entry, another child sent from the city orphanage to fill the place. The sisters noticed the pattern, though they did not speak of it openly. Children came to Black Hollow, and many did not leave. Agatha's presence grew. She never took residence in the convent, but rather the stone parsonage beside the chapel, a building older than the town itself, its original purpose forgotten, once a traveler's hospice or perhaps a quarantine house, depending on whom you ask. Windows always shuttered, chimney never smoking. She was not seen outside after dusk, and yet lights were noticed, flickering in strange rhythms, like signals, from behind the high windows. Some said they were lanterns, others flames without fire. A stable boy claimed he saw shapes dancing on the glass, figures too small to be Agatha, too tall to be children. He left town 2 weeks later. The church began to change. Baptisms were conducted at night. No records were kept. No parents present. Only the sisters, who were instructed to bring the children washed, quieted, dressed in linen. The chapel font was drained, a basin placed in its stead, not silver, but stone, rough and dark, like it had been pulled from the earth. Agnes remembered the first child she brought, a boy of 6 with a cough that shook his ribs. Agatha did not speak, but gestured. The boy climbed into the basin on his own. He did not cry, but his lips turned blue. Agnes had turned away. She told herself it was the cold. Still, the town clung to Agatha's presence. They said she brought peace, that ever since she arrived, no one had been murdered. No thefts, no floods. Even the wolves stayed to the higher hills. They did not say, because fear is stronger than faith. The other sisters began to drift. Some left for new parishes. Others fell ill. One was found outside the parsonage steps, frozen stiff in summer. Her hands were clasped as though in prayer, her mouth open, as if mid-hymn. Sister Agnes remained, because something in her, something small, brave, foolish, wanted to know what Agatha truly was. Not just what she was called. She began to watch, not from the chapel, but from the attic of the convent, through a knothole that overlooked the path to the parsonage. Each evening, after the last candle dimmed in the nave, Agatha would exit through the sacristy door, never hurried, never looking side to side, always alone, except once. Agnes saw a shape, shorter, unsteady, trailing behind Agatha's gray silhouette, a child, limping slightly, wearing no shoes. The moon was full, and for a moment the light caught the child's face. It was the same boy from the basin, but his eyes were dark now, fully, horribly dark, with no whites. And he smiled. Agnes did not sleep that night, nor the night after. She told herself it was a dream, that sorrow made shadows where there were none, that grief played tricks. But she began to find strange things in the chapel, ribbons tied around the altar rail, not in festive colors, but in deep red, ashes beneath the pews, as though candles had burned low and been crushed. And once in the confessional, a lock of hair, damp and smelling faintly of lavender. The sisters stopped speaking of Agatha at all. They would not meet her gaze. They walked a longer path to avoid the parsonage. When asked, they gave simple answers. She is a gift. She is a calling. She is not ours to question. Agnes began writing letters, small ones, folded twice and hidden in the hymnals, then longer ones, stored beneath floorboards. Behind old plaster, she knew the sisters would not read them. They were not for the living, They were warnings, confessions. Memories she feared would die inside her if left unspoken. She never signed them, only sealed them. Always with wax from the altar candles, once blessed, now long unconsecrated, because she knew Agatha would not last forever. But neither would the truth, unless buried deep enough to grow again. They said Agatha Rook healed the broken. But some things should not be mended. Some silences are not sacred. And some women do not serve the church. They consume it. He remembered the bell, not the sound, but the waiting. Each Sunday before dawn, it would shiver once, a single iron note from the chapel tower. Not loud, not calling, just enough to unsettle the sleep from a child's eyes. The children of Black Hollow would rise then, as if pulled upward by something older than morning. No one told them to. No one needed to. They gathered on the chapel steps before light broke. Shoes scuffed. Fingers still crusted with sleep. No songs yet. Only breath dotted was called Silent Choir, a name whispered by the sisters with softened mouths, as if afraid it might hear its own name spoken aloud. No parents attended. No parishioners arrived. It was not part of Mass. Not listed on any bulletin. It was for the children alone. Sister Agnes, though still young herself, remembered escorting the line of small figures through the chapel doors. One by one, always in silence. She would place a gentle hand on each shoulder, a ritual, though she never knew who had taught her to do so. She did not look them in the eye. They walked into the nave like lambs into fog. Agatha was always already there. She stood not at the altar, but before the pews, near the stone basin. The sunlight had not yet reached the stained glass. The shadows still clung to the floor, pooling like oil. Agatha did not speak. She would simply raise one hand, and the children would begin their breathless choir. No songs were taught. No notes played. The sound was not music. Not quite. It was humming, yes, but fractured, like echoes lost between mountains. Each child's voice drifted apart from the others, weaving strange dissonance, low at first, like sleep talking, then sharper, as if they remembered something they'd never known, but they never began until she touched a throat. That was the rule. A former altar boy, grown now and long moved away, once spoke in a tremble when asked. She'd touch your neck. Just 2 fingers, cold, right over your voice box. Then you'd start singing, and you wouldn't know what you were singing. Just that you had to. His name was Elias Becker. He had been 9 at the time. He remembered the songs like one remembers fever dreams, too vivid to be false, too strange to be truth. They weren't in English, he said, or Latin. I don't know what it was. But we sang until she closed her eyes. Then we stopped. Sometimes Agatha would hum with them. But no one ever saw her mouth move. Sister Agnes watched from the edges, behind the last pew, breath held like a secret. She counted the children in her head. Always 16? But one morning there were only 14. She said nothing. No one else remarked. The following week there were 15 again. A new girl, pale, thin, hair the color of burned straw. She did not blink much. She hummed louder than the others. Agnes asked the other sisters where she came from. Orphaned, they said. Sent from the East. No surname. No papers. That girl was named Clara. At least, that's what the other children called her. She never said her own name. Clara was touched by Agatha's fingers every week. Without fail. And each time, her voice grew stronger. Not beautiful, not tuneful, but piercing, like a string pulled too tight. One morning, Elias did not arrive. His mother sent word to the convent that he had slept soundly through the bell, that he could not be roused until nearly noon. When he did wake, he wept, not loudly, but continuously. No fever, no bruises. No words. Just tears. She took him away the following week. packed what little they owned, and left Black Hollow before dusk. No goodbye, no farewell to the parish. They would not be the last. Agnes returned that Sunday to count again. This time, only 13. She looked to Agatha. The woman stood still, her shawl hanging like a curtain around her shoulders. Her eyes were closed, her lips pressed thin. She raised a hand and touched Clara's throat. Clara hummed. The others followed, but Agnes did not count them again. She began to listen instead, not to the sound, but to what was missing. The choir made no music, but beneath it something moved. A rhythm not born of lungs or voice, but of breath held too long. The sound of mouths remembering the shape of a word they had never learned, a word Agnes would later dream of, but never recall. The sisters began to worry, quietly. Children were falling ill in strange ways. Some became mute. Others developed stutters, or sang at night in their sleep, odd rhythms, dissonant keys. One girl was found humming with her face submerged in a washtub, water rippling around her lips. They called it a phase, a fever, a spell of grief, but they did not stop the choir, because Agatha said nothing, and the children kept arriving. 2 of them would not return home. Jacob Hill, age 7, last seen walking with Clara toward the chapel. He had been shy, fond of birds, left behind a carved sparrow that no one claimed. And Esther Wren, age 10, quiet, always smiling. She had braided Clara's hair the week before their parents asked, once, then stopped asking, because the church was quiet, because Sunday came, because no one wanted to speak of what they already knew. The convent received no answers, only a parcel, delivered without sender, wrapped in burlap. Inside, 3 hymnals, torn down the spine, their pages stained dark, each marked with a letter. On the inner flap, Arsagnes kept them, hid them beneath the loose board in the vestry. She never spoke of them. But from that Sunday forward, she stood behind the children, not as a sister, but as a witness. She never let herself hum, never let the sound touch her mouth, but she listened. And every week, the voices changed, deepened, even when the children grew no taller. And Clara's eyes never changed, but her smile did. Stretched longer, sharper, as if she remembered, more than a girl should, as if the songs were not being sung to her, but through her. Then, one Sunday, she did not come. And neither did the bell. What begins in silence rarely ends there. Some choirs echo longer than their voices allow. And some songs were never meant for children. The letter was folded in halves, not thirds. The paper had softened with time, not torn, but worn at the edges, like something grieved over in silence. There was no date, only a line of ink pressed into the corner. There was no baptism. There was only absence. The handwriting was careful, unshaken, almost reverent. Her name was Helen Dorsey, and she had waited 7 months to bring her daughter to the chapel. It had been a long winter, hard on bone, harder on spirit. Her child Miriam was born on the 2nd night of Advent, when the frost curled in on the windows like hands pressed against glass. The doctor said she was healthy, quiet but strong, no colic, no fever, just wide, dark eyes and a calm that unsettled even her grandmother. She stares too long, they whispered in the kitchen. She doesn't blink like she should, but Helen didn't mind. She thought silence was a sign of peace. When spring came, she carried the girl in linen and lamb's wool, cradled close, and walked the long path to St. Augustine's, the chapel. Bell was silent that day, though it was Sunday. Helen had no carriage, no escort. Her husband had drowned the winter before, beneath the ice, his boots caught in the reeds. She wore black since Epiphany, and now her steps carried more than mourning. They carried intent. She wanted the child baptized, named in the eyes of God, cleansed of all that winter had taken. It was Sister Agnes who met her at the chapel door. She looked startled, though, not unkind. Agnes remembered Helen from choir years before, from candle processions, from grief. She looked to the child in Helen's arms and said quietly, "You've come on a day no one does." Helen only nodded. The font was ready. Water had been poured. A basin deeper than she remembered, wide and dark and still. Agatha was already there. She stood not in vestments, but gray again, her shawl a little heavier than spring should require. She said nothing. She gestured once, a slow curl of fingers beckoning toward the stone basin. Helen stepped forward, pressing a kiss to her child's brow. And then she was holding nothing. Her arms were empty. No sound had come. No hands had moved. No wind stirred. Only stillness. She gasped, looked down, looked to the water. But the basin was undisturbed. No ripple, no weight, no child. Agatha lowered her hand slowly, deliberately, and said, for the first and only time, "She has been taken whole." Helen fell to her knees. Agnes tried to lift her, but the woman was already gone, in spirit if not in body. Her scream never came. Only breath, deep and rhythmic, like prayer turned hollow. They took her to the rectory, wrapped her hands in cloth, for she had torn her palms raw against the pews. She did not sleep that night, nor the next. When she rose, she returned to the chapel, and again the next day, and the next. No child. No answer. No baptism. She asked to see the records. There were none. She begged the sisters. They offered only tea and sorrow. On the 7th day, she entered the chapel before dawn. Alone. The nave was quiet, the altar dark, but something waited. Not presence, absence. Carved into stone. She began searching the pews, not for signs of life, but signs of memory. A thread of hair, a fleck of milk, a cry that had not yet left the wood. She traced her fingers along the carved backs, beneath the hymnals, under the kneelers. And it was there, in the 5th pew from the front, right side, a seam. It should not have been there. A stitch in the oak, fine thread, nearly invisible. She picked at it, slowly, pulled. The wood opened. Inside, a linen christening dress, folded, stained. Her child's. The hem bore a mark, not ink. A small round stamp, a crescent inside a triangle, burned into the fabric, faint but permanent. Helen did not scream. She folded the dress and left the chapel. She wrote a letter that night, not to the bishop, not to the sisters, to no one, but she wrote 3 pages, each one more even than the last. She wrote of Agatha, of the font, of the stillness, and she ended it with, "If they do not speak of it, it does not mean they do not know." The next morning she walked into the woods. She was not seen again. Her house remained untouched for months. When the town finally entered, they found no letters, no cradle, no traces of Miriam. Only the baptismal candle, unlit, and a jar of font water, sealed and labeled, too still. Sister Agnes kept the memory. She did not tell the other sisters what she had seen in the pew. She did not explain why she began running her hands under each bench, each week checking the seams. She did not admit that she, too, had once heard the silence call, because there were others, mothers who came, one by one, each season, and some left with lighter arms than they had brought. The sisters called them the weepers. Agnes began marking pews, small notches beneath the wood, one for each child that did not return. By the end of the year, there were 6, and the font It never emptied, even when drained, even when covered, even when sealed. The water was always there, still, cold, waiting. They said it was holy water, but holiness should not hunger. And no child should vanish without even a splash dot. She has been taken whole. The words stayed behind. The child did not. There was a time when music poured through St. Augustine's like sunlight through stained glass, gently, with warmth. The choir sang hymns that flickered in the air and vanished in the folds of linen veils and candle smoke. But that was before 1893, before the psalm was banned. Psalm 73, "Truly God is good to Israel." But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. It was once a favorite, soft and sorrowful, full of questions about justice, envy, and the fate of the wicked. A psalm for the doubting, for those who saw evil prosper and wondered aloud where God had gone. After 1893, it was never sung again. The ban was not recorded in sermon, nor explained from the pulpit. It was quietly enforced. Choir pages were torn, hymnals altered. One sister was said to have been reassigned simply for humming its final verse in the garden. But one letter, folded tightly and stained with oil, remained. Found lodged behind the chapel's pipe organ, sealed in wax the color of ashdod, it began plainly. Psalm 73 must not be sung aloud, not fully, not by children. The letter was unsigned, but the tone bore witness, not of fear, but of mourning. Sister Agnes had only heard it once, long ago. It was a Tuesday choir practice. She was sweeping ash from the sacristy floor when the children began to rehearse. The melody was soft, rising like smoke, unsteady but familiar. Then she heard it, the fourth verse. They speak against the heavens, and their tongues strut through the earth. One boy, Caleb Moore, age 11, faltered. Not a note missed, not a slip of tongue, but his eyes rolled upward, his shoulders hunched. And then a sound. Click, low. Wet Dotty opened his mouth to sing the fifth verse, but instead he gasped, shallow, sharp, desperate. His throat moved as if pushed from the inside. He did not cry out. He only choked. Agatha was in the room. She did not intervene. Sister Agnes dropped the broom and ran. The children scattered. Only Clara remained, her lips still moving, silent now, as if finishing the verse on behalf of the boy who could not. They called the physician. He declared it sudden laryngeal trauma. Suggested perhaps Caleb had been stung by something. A bee, a hornet. But there was no swelling, no sting, no mark. He never sang again. His voice returned in whispers, months later, but he never again lifted it in song. He stopped attending choir, and when the others asked what had happened, he only muttered one word, opened. Sister Agnes asked the choirmaster what hymn they had been singing. He would not say. He only shook his head and burned the sheet music in the chapel hearth. But Agnes remembered the verse, and one line in particular, until I went into the sanctuary of God. She searched the vestry that night, found an older hymnal, one not yet altered, and there it was, circled in faint pencil, Psalm 73, underneath, written in a smaller hand, a single word, choke. She brought the hymnal to the Mother Superior. The older woman took it with steady hands, closed it, and without meeting Annis's eyes, whispered, "Some songs are not for us, not anymore." It wasn't the first time. Records showed that in 1891, 3 children had collapsed during a midsummer psalm recital. One had bitten through his tongue. Another had convulsed so violently she snapped the crucifix from her own necklace. The last one simply stopped, hands lifted mid-note, jaw agape, no sound. All 3 were sent to convalesce. In the city. None returned. The sisters called it illness, hysteria, over-exertion. But Psalm 7:3 was removed from the liturgy 2 years later. One former sister, long since retired and living in quiet reclusion, would later write a letter to a distant cousin, never sent, found among her belongings after death, describing what she believed to be the cause. Something in the verse itself. She wrote, not the words, the space between them, as though certain tones invite, as though the throat becomes a door. Agnes could not forget that phrasing. A door, not opened, but forced. She began to observe the other children during choir. Not what they sang, but how they looked while singing. The strain of muscle, the twitch of breath, the way the youngest children flinched when certain intervals were held too long. And she noticed something else. Each time a child began to seize, whether with breathlessness, with tremor, with tears, Agatha was present, not singing, not watching, but near, never touching, never instructing, but standing within breath's reach, as if waiting. After the third such incident, the organ keys were dusted with ash. An accident, they said. A fire beneath the pipes. The air thick with soot. Choir canceled. No hymn that week. But the children still hummed, alone, in corners, while drawing, while sweeping. And not a melody, just fragments, loops, repetitions, the same bar, the same line. The verse that ends, then I understood their end. Sister. Agnes found herself humming it once, without realizing. Alone in the convent hall, her hand resting on the wall, her fingertips tingling. She stopped only when she felt warmth on her palm. She pulled back and saw it. A small, dark print, like a breath, left behind. She began binding her mouth in prayer cloth when she entered the chapel. Not from piety, but protection, because she feared what her voice might invite. Psalm 73 was no longer sung, but its verses lingered in margins, in memory, in the hush between rites. One sister reported a girl waking from sleep, lips parted, mouthing words she had never been taught. Another claimed to hear the notes played on the organ, long after the pipes had been removed, but the final sign came with Clara. She stood before the altar during rehearsal. Alone, she opened her mouth. No sound came, only breath, thick and heavy. Then, in a voice not her own, she sang the final line. But it is good for me to draw near to God. And behind her, the candles went out. One by one. Some psalms are meant to comfort, others to question. But some are meant to feed, and those the church does not forget. Even when it dares not speak. The company called it Shaft 8. The locals called it Hollow Mouth. It ran beneath the hill where St. Augustine's parsonage slouched like an old drunk against the trees, half braced, half waiting to collapse. The mine tunnel had been laid in 1889, following a vein of soft coal that snaked quietly beneath the chapel's foundations. The land had been leased from the diocese, a silent arrangement. No sermons against it, no public blessing either. Just silence, the kind of silence that means someone signed something they shouldn't have, and too many owed too much to speak up. The miners said the shaft felt colder than it should. Not cold like wind or water, but an inward cold, a hollow cold, like stepping into someone's mouth mid-breath. It was in the summer of 1894 when the first voice was heard. A miner named Robert Talley was the one to report it. He had been laying planks near the second drop, close to where the tunnel turned east, beneath the back foundations of the parsonage. The air was dry, his hands steady. But as he knelt, he paused. There, rising faintly from the rock wall, came the sound of humming. Not machinery, not wind, but unmistakably human. A child's voice, soft, repeating, Off dash key dot, he froze. Not out of fear, but confusion. A kind of disbelief that required stillness to verify. He pressed his ear to the soot-streaked stone. The humming grew clearer. Then. A whisper, not words. Just the shape of breath that wanted to be one. Robert stood, called for the foreman. By the time anyone else arrived, the sound was gone. Mocked him, sent him home, called it shaft sickness. But 2 days later, another report. This time from a man named Elias Boone, a quiet worker, not known for nerves. He had been wheeling carts along the east tunnel when he noticed prints. Small, bare, child-sized dot in the soot. They were fresh, leading nowhere. Just 12 steps across the stone. No entrance, no exit. As if something had been placed there, then removed, or stepped out briefly and returned to somewhere deeper. The mine manager ordered the prints erased and filed a report with the company's main office. The phrase vocal mirage was coined. An internal memo declared, the presence of subterranean air pockets and decayed support beams may produce auditory anomalies. No cause for alarm, but letters from the miners say otherwise. One, unsigned, scrawled in grease pencil on folded parchment. We hear them at the wall. We feel them underfoot. There are no children here, but the earth thinks otherwise. Sister Agnes did not know of the tunnel until that year. The mine was spoken of only in passing, a place for men, not for nuns. But one Sunday morning, she noticed a man sitting in the very back pew, trembling. His boots were blackened, his fingernails caked with coal, but his face, pale, drawn, lips split as though he'd been biting them for hours. She approached him gently. He would not look. Updot only said, "They're singing in the dark." Agnes sat beside him. His hand twitched against his thigh. A nervous habit. They don't stop, even when there's no breath. He rose before she could speak again, left his hat on the pew, and walked out the chapel doors barefoot. He was not seen again. 2 weeks later, the east tunnel collapsed. No. One was killed. It happened during night rotation, and the affected corridor had been marked for repair. But the reason given by the crew chief was curious. The wall gave in, he said, like something pushed from the other side. Not down, not gravity. Inward. The mine was closed. Shaft 8 sealed. Officially, the collapse rendered the entire east tunnel unsafe. Unofficially, the letters continued. Soot-stained scraps began appearing in lunch pails. Chalk carvings on the wall near the shaft entrance. Small handprints. Once, a cross, turned, upside down and bent in the middle. Another time, the word listen, etched in what looked like rust, but rubbed red. The mine company denied everything. They had their exit. No need for more, but the children in town began to hum. Not songs, not nursery rhymes, just low, rhythmic sounds, deep and slow, like lullabies stretched to the point of snapping. One child, age 5, was found crouching in the fireplace, soot on her palms, muttering, "They don't like the stone that breathes. They want out." She had never been in the chapel, but she knew Agatha's name. Sister Agnes began to wonder what had been buried beneath the parsonage before the mine ever reached it. Old town maps were scarce. The diocesan archives worse. But one ruined ledger from 1842 referenced a quarantine cellar built into the base of the hill, a containment crypt for plague victims brought upriver. No exhumation ever ordered. No conversion documented. Just a note in faded ink. Lids nailed shut. Walls blessed. No entry until God allows. God never allowed. But Agatha did. The foundation stone at the rear of the parsonage bore a symbol, barely legible beneath moss and water stain. A triangle within a circle. Agnes had seen it once before. carved into the bottom of the old font beneath the basin. The same font that never emptied. The same font the children stared into, humming. She placed her palm on the floor of the chapel late one evening, pressed hard, waited. And after a moment she felt it. Not a vibration, not movement, a warmth. Like breath. The mind was sealed. The chapel stood, but earth remembers. Stone does not forget. And beneath the hymns and sermons, something is listening. They walked barefoot. Always barefoot, each March. As the snow retreated into the woods and the creek began to hum again, the children arrived. Always girls, always young, between 7 and 13, dressed in black wool and draped in thin black veils, too thin to warm, too opaque to see through. They came in single file from the northern trail, descending out of the woods and into Black Hollow. Always at dusk. The procession passed through town and ended at the gates of St. Augustine's. They never spoke. They never looked up. There, hands hung quietly at their sides, some clenching rosaries, others empty and red from cold. No one knew where they came from. The townspeople said they were sent from the sister home in Glenbury, or the orphan asylum, 3 counties over. Others whispered it was penance, girls born under blood moons or into broken baptisms. But no one asked, because they came every year, and they stayed through spring, and because they left quietly, no one saw the need to question the ritual. Arrived in mourning. And everyone treated it as such. Sister Agnes remembered the first time she saw them, a line of small black shapes against the last gray snow, trailing down the hillside like spilled ink. The sun had not yet set, but it had turned cold. That year there were 17. They were taken to the dormitory wing of the parsonage, fed, clothed, given a cot, a number, and a verse to memorize. Not a name. Not at first. They were called marklings. The term never used in front of them, but known well behind doors. Each wore a number stitched into the hem of her underskirt. Sister Agnes had done the stitching herself, though she was never told where the numbers came from or how they were assigned. Each year, the marklings joined the silent choir. They did not speak until spoken to. They did not sing until their throat was touched, and they never, ever removed their veils until the 3rd Sunday after their arrival. It was a ritual without scripture, a ceremony with no sermon, but it was followed, until the year of the extra veil. Agnes had been 30 that year. Older now, though not old enough to be called Mother Superior. The cold had lingered longer than usual, and several of the pews had split under frost. The font had crusted over, though no one remembered filling it. When the marklings came that year, they were expected. The bells did not ring, but the sisters knew, they always knew, when the air shifted, when the town hushed at dusk and turned its face to the hills. Sister Agnes was among those who stood at the chapel steps to receive them. Her hands were folded, her shawl pulled tight. 24 girls arrived. The sisters lined them up inside the nave as they did every year. They removed their boots, measured their heights, washed their hands and mouths with water from the basin. One sister, young and new, made a quiet joke about it. Feels more like unmaking than cleansing, doesn't it? No one laughed. Each girl was led to her cot, assigned her number, given her verse. But as Sister Agnes stitched the numbers into linen, she paused. There were only 23 names on the list. She counted again. She asked the Mother Superior. She checked the ledgers. Only 23 girls were expected, but there were 24 beds filled. She told herself it was a clerical error. That one name had been recorded elsewhere. That someone had simply forgotten to update the manifest. That perhaps, even, one child had been sent early, but she couldn't forget the way the last girl in line had walked. Not like the others. Her steps were slower, heavier, like each one was remembered not made Dot and her veil darker somehow, lower. When Agnes had looked into her face, just for a moment, she saw nothing, Dot, not absence. Not fear, Dot, just stillness. She said nothing. Not that night, not the next, but on the third Sunday, when the veils were to be removed, she watched more closely. Each child stood before the altar. One by one, they lifted the veil from their face. Pale, quiet, eyes unblinking. All of them until the last. The 24th did not move. Her veil remained. Her hands were clasped. Agnes approached gently. Child? She asked. No response. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if listening. Not to Agnes, but to something else. Then she opened her mouth. No sound. But Agnes saw her lips move. 3 syllables. Mouthing them slowly. Again. And again. Agnes would never write them down. But she remembered. And the font behind her rippled. The veil never came off. That night, Sister Agnes searched every record, every report, every census list from the orphanage. No child was unaccounted for. No child sent without notice. And yet, there she was. A cot made, a verse assigned, a mouth that whispered what no one else could hear. She was gone by morning. The bed was empty, the sheets folded, the underskirt gone. But one veil remained, draped over the chapel banister, wet with something thicker than water. The townspeople noticed nothing. Only the snow melting faster than expected. Only the wind humming something low. The next year, the marklings came again. 20-3. They counted the girls. They marked the names. But the veil never lies. And once worn, it remembers the face. Even if the world forgets. The child. It was the only door in the parsonage that bore a rusted keyhole. The confessional, not ornate, but heavy, squat, more like a cupboard than a sacred space. Its wood had darkened over time, blackened not by paint, but by hands. So many had pressed palms to its surface without entering. So many had paused before it, not with reverence, but with unease. Sister Agnes had never seen it open. Not once in 10 years. It stood just inside the chapel's side nave, beneath the southern stained glass, tucked into shadow. Most believed it unused, forgotten. Some sisters claimed it had been sealed after a flood rotted the kneeler. Others said it had never opened at all, built as a symbolic fixture, a reminder of judgment, not a vessel for it. But every Friday at dusk, without fail, the door was locked. From the inside. No sound ever came, no scent, no flicker of candlelight through the slats. But the lock clicked shortly after the vesper bell, as if turned by unseen hands. And each Saturday morning, the door was once again ajar, opened an inch, no more. They asked Agatha once. Long ago. Sister Nora, still new, still brave, had approached her and asked gently, "Who do you hear on Fridays?" Agatha looked at her with that same blank softness she gave the altar, not eyes meeting, but passing through, and answered, "The one who sings back." Nora never asked again. The sisters grew used to the ritual. As with so much of Agatha's presence, they filed it under obedience, not understanding, just endurance. But Sister Agnes watched. She noticed that on Fridays the chapel grew colder. The candles near the confessional refused to stay lit, that the marklings, on those evenings, would press their ears to their cots, murmuring words they forgot by morning. And always the same thing beneath their breath. "Don't answer." Year the door was opened was the year Agatha vanished. She was simply gone. No departure. No funeral. No announcement. Her shawl remained on the back of the vestry chair. Her cup of boiled mint left half sipped. But the woman herself evaporated. No prints in the soil. No footsteps from the parsonage. Just absence, complete and unquestioned, as if she had stepped into a page and closed the book behind her. The sisters hesitated for days, then a week, then 2, but the door of the confessional did not lock again, not until a child, one of the Marklings, name uncertain, began to hum in the hallway, head tilted to the wooden slats. She said, "It's still in there." That night, a scraping sound came from behind the door. Soft, like rope sliding against dry wood. It was the Mother Superior who ordered it opened. The hinges resisted. The lock had rusted over, though no one had turned it. They used a crowbar, quiet and slow, as though afraid to wake something sleeping inside. There was no priest's chair, only one stool, its legs uneven as if gnawed at the base. A rope hung from the iron vent above, long, frayed, looped. The knot not recent, but weathered. It swung lightly, though the air was still. There was no dust, no cobwebs. The space had been occupied, recently. And on the floor, a folded letter. Agnes lifted it with cloth. The paper smelled of copper and smoke. It was written in 2 hands. The first, precise, mature. The strokes narrow, deliberate, like a teacher's script. The second, childish, rounded letters, staggered spacing, words misspelled, then crossed, and now rewritten. The first half read, "I have held her voice for 9 years. It is not mine. It was never mine. But she gave it to me, and I used it. I sang what she could not. I asked what she would not. I screamed when she chose silence. Now she wants it back." The second half read, "I was good. I was still. I kept the shape. I sang soft. She took it. I let her, but I'm tired. And she's still hungry." The bottom bore no names. Only a mark, a crude drawing. A mouth with 2 lines through it. Sealed. Sister Agnes brought the letter to the Superior. It was burned by morning. But Agnes remembered the shape of the words. The way the script faltered near the fold, as though the child's hand had trembled, or been guided. She began to wonder, had Agatha ever been alone in the confessional? Had the second voice always been there? And worse, had it ever been hers? To begin with, the next Friday, a child went missing. Not from the dormitories, not from the record books, but from memory. There was a cot, made and worn. There was a verse, half recited on a crumpled scrap near the basin, but no one remembered her name. Agnes stood in the confessional that evening. Alone. The rope was still there. She did not touch it, only sat and waited. She counted her breaths, the creaks in the wood, the slats between the walls. She expected stillness, or cold, but what came was heat. A warm exhale from the vent above. And then a whisper, one she would never write down, because it spoke with 2 voices, and both were hers. We call it confession, but some truths do not need to be spoken aloud. They just need a throat, and a silence wide enough to echo through. Paul Whitlow was 8 the spring, his hair turned white. It had once been the color of straw, uneven and sun-touched from long hours beside the mill creek. His mother often combed it flat on Sundays. "You look like a scarecrow," she'd laugh, smoothing it into place. But after the font, it never lay flat again. After the font, it never grew at all. He arrived at St. Augustine's one morning in May, wearing a stiff-collared shirt and black shoes polished too brightly for his age. His father, Sheriff Whitlow, brought him, not out of faith, but something sterner. Not reverence, not love. Obligation. The baptism had not been scheduled. No announcement, no visitors. Only Agatha, waiting beside the stone basin, and Sister Agnes, who stood quietly at the nave's edge, as she always did, with her hands folded so tightly the knuckles ached. The font had not been filled that morning. Agnes remembered that clearly. She had polished it herself the night before. dried it with linen. The stone bowl had been empty when she left, clean, cold, hollow, but when she returned, it was full. Not with water, but soot, soft, fine, dark, like powdered charcoal or the sweepings from an old chimney. It sat thick in the bowl, undisturbed, unmoved by breath or draught. There was no incense burning, no fire lit, but the basin was warm. Paul stood beside it, blinking up at Agatha. He did not cry. He did not ask questions. His eyes were dull, not blank, but quiet, like a page that had already been written on too many times. Sheriff Whitlow watched from the vestibule, his hat in hand. His jaw locked. Agatha gestured. Paul stepped forward. The rite that followed had no scripture, no oil, no cross of water, only silence. She placed her fingers on the boy's jaw, tilted his head, leaned him forward, and dipped the silver chalice. It rose dark. The soot clung to the rim, thick and glistening, as though wet, though Agnes could not understand how. It was not water, not wine, just ash, but it shimmered. Agatha pressed this cup to the boy's lips. He drank. Not with hesitation, but with obedience, as though he had always known the taste, as though the moment had been waiting for him, not the other way around. When the cup was empty, she wiped his mouth, not with cloth, with her hand. The boy looked at her, then turned toward the pews. Agnes caught his gaze. She would never forget it. It wasn't fear she saw, nor pain. It was recognition. As though the boy had seen something he was now a part of. As though something inside him had opened, and nothing else could ever be poured in again. He did not speak after that day. Not once. His mother brought him home, tried to comb his hair, found it brittle, white at the roots. She burned his clothes in the hearth, washed his skin with vinegar and prayer. Nothing changed. He stopped answering to his name. He no longer played. He began to trace shapes in the dust by the windows, loops and triangles and lines that bent inward like mouths stitched shut. He slept on the floor. And whispered. To someone no one else could hear. His father came to the chapel a week later, not to ask. Not to accuse, only to sit in the very last pew and hold his badge in his hand. He turned it over slowly, as if weighing it. Then he stood. He walked to the basin. He placed the badge in the soot. And left. The next morning, Paul was gone. No notice, no search, no call for help. Sheriff Whitlow never filed a report. The house stood empty within the week. Some say they moved. Others said they were taken. A few whispered that Paul had wandered into the woods and never returned. But no search was ever made. No one knocked on doors. No one asked who had last seen him, because they all had. And none of them wanted to remember. Sister Agnes found the badge 2 days later, still in the font. It had blackened at the edges, bent at the center. As though melted. She reached for it, but the basin smoked beneath her hand. Not heat, not fire. Memory. She saw Paul's face, his mouth moving. No sound, but the feeling, heavy, thick, as though something was being pulled from him, thread by thread, down into the stone. That night, she opened one of the hidden letters. It was tucked beneath the old vestry floorboard, one she had nearly forgotten. The parchment was brittle, the ink uneven, as though written by a trembling hand. It read. He drank because she asked, but she didn't ask him. She asked what was beneath, and it answered through him. His mouth moved, but it wasn't his voice. There was no signature, only a name scrawled in the corner, Paul, and a smear beneath it, like soot pressed by a fingertip. Agnes folded the letter, placed it in the hollow behind the broken hymnboard, said nothing, because by then she understood. The font had never been for water. It was for invitation. A door carved in stone, waiting not for prayer, but permission, and once opened, it remembered every child. The cup was lifted, the child obeyed, and the stone drank more than ash. It drank memory, and memory does not forget. The storm came down the mountains like a whisper turning cruel. The trees bowed before it, not in reverence, but resignation. Wind curled through the chapel rafters, humming a hollow chord. The windows of St. Augustine's flickered with candlelight, though no candles had been lit. It was April 3rd, 1898, a night of thunder, and something else. Sister Agnes remembered the stillness. That kind of stillness that comes not before sound, but beneath it, a hush that spreads like cold water under a closed door. It was the kind of quiet that asks you not to move, not to breathe too deeply, the kind that waits to see if you'll look away. At 11:06 p.m., the bell began to toll. 3 times, then 4. Then a pause. Then once again, not a peal, but a struggle. The sound uneven, fractured, as though the bell were trying to say something it had forgotten how to phrase. And then came the silence, and then came the realization. The rope had been cut. It had been frayed for weeks. Sister Agnes had seen the fibers curling down from the tower. She had warned the Mother Superior. They had planned to replace it after the thaw, but no one had gone up. No one had fixed it. No. One should have been able to ring it, and certainly not backwards. The bell rope pulled upward, not downward, not by weight or hand, but drawn taut in reverse, rising into the tower as if the air itself had remembered a command. It could not refuse. Agnes did not run. She stood in the hallway of the convent, her fingers pressed into the wooden frame of the chapel door, listening. 7 tolls, then 3, then 1. A child's voice hummed from behind the nave wall. Not a song. Just breath, shaped like memory. She crossed the threshold, her feet bare, the stone floor colder than it should have been, though no rain had yet touched it. The pews were empty, the altar untouched. The font still shimmered with something that was not water. But there were no children. No choir. No Agatha, only soot. The first print was small, toes splayed, pressed deep into the wood near the front pew, as if the foot had been heavier than a child's ought to be. More followed, trailing between the rows, darkening toward the altar, and then down. The floorboard beneath the altar had split, not by force, not by age, but opened. As if something beneath had finally accepted its invitation. The soot prints disappeared into the dark, their edges soft, like breath on glass. Agnes dropped to her knees, not to pray, but to listen. There was no sound, but the floor was warm. She ran her hand over the edge of the broken board, found a handprint, smaller than her own, etched in ash. Fingers curled inward. She did not go below. She could not, because there was no ladder. Only down. She rose slowly and crossed to the choir stalls. Empty. Scarves still hung on the hooks. One hymn book lay open, not to a psalm, but to a blank page. No ink, no notes, just a circle drawn in the corner inside, which was a single phrase: "We are sung." The candles had not been burned, but the wax had melted. As if the air had wept heat, not fire, but fever. She returned to the convent, not running, not speaking, only walking like one already buried. By morning, the town began to ask. Where had the children gone? Where had the voices gone? Where was Agatha? The chapel remained locked. The sisters did not answer. The bell never rang again. Its tongue had cracked, clean through. A split like a scream silenced mid-word. The town whispered. Some. Syed Agatha had taken them into the hills. A pilgrimage, a retreat. Others said the mountain swallowed them. That the mine shaft had opened again. That the children had never existed to begin with. A trick of faith. of fear. But Sister Agnes remembered their hands. She remembered the weight of their heads against her shoulder, the way they braided each other's hair, the way their mouths moved during hymns even. When no sound came, they were not imagined. They were offered, and something had accepted. She entered the chapel a final time that week. Alone the altar cloth had curled at the edges. Beneath it, there, wood was blackened. She knelt beside the font, and on its rim, carved in a hand not hers, were the words, "Return is not resurrection." She placed her fingers in the basin this time. It was empty, truly empty not dry, but void as though even the ash had fled. The bell tower stood still, but wind passed through it differently. Now, not like a sigh, more like a breath waiting to be drawn again. Last lines, some tolls are not heard with ears. Some bells do not mark time, but passage. And some floors open only once, because what enters never needs to leave. They kept her room untouched, even after the fire, even after the chapel was sealed, after the bells were silenced, after the floorboards stopped opening, and the sisters stopped asking how many cots had been filled. Clara May's bed remained made, tightly drawn sheets, a hymnal tucked beneath the pillow, one comb with missing teeth and a letter folded beneath the floorboard. It was Sister Agnes who found it, years after the children vanished, years after Agatha's disappearance had been explained away in bureaucratic terms no one believed. Room was hollow by then, the air stale, but the board still creaked, just slightly, beneath the cot's foot. Agnes pulled it loose with steady fingers, expecting soot or a name carved by a frightened nail. But instead, the envelope. Small, no wax, no seal, no address, only her name. Clara. She had been 11, quiet-eyed, with hair that refused to stay, braided and shoes she never scuffed. She had sung like she had lived before, not loudly, but deeply, as if she knew the tune from memory long before learning the words. She had joined the silent choir without hesitation, and she had stopped singing weeks before the bell tolled. Backwards, the letter was written in cramped strokes, pressed hard into the paper, as though her hand had shaken, and she'd fought it back. Ink blotched in corners, edges smudged. The script uneven. Agnes read it in the candlelight of the vestry, alone, though it did not feel like solitude. The first line was a warning. If I stop speaking, it means she's still hungry. Beneath, in a small drawing, a mouth, open wide, with a second mouth curled inside it. The letter continued. I used to sing louder than the others, because I thought it helped. I thought if I filled the space, it wouldn't echo. But I was wrong. She doesn't feed on silence. She feeds on return, on what comes back. Agnes felt the floor cool beneath her knees. The letter went on. They say she gave me the voice. But it wasn't hers. It was mine, only twisted. She fed it to me like a spoonful of warm sugar. She said it would help the others find me, but it was only so she'd know where I was. Every time I sang, she echoed me, and every time I listened, she moved closer. Clara had written in long sentences, desperate ones, some crossed out, others rewritten with the same phrase. She lives in the echo now. That's where she waits, not behind doors, not in dreams, but in the air that listens back. Agnes touched the paper where the ink had blurred. A tear? A spill? Or breath? The letter grew darker in tone near the end. Clara wrote of the final choir session. No sister present. Just Agatha. She told us to hum and only hum. No words, just breath. But I saw her lips move, and I knew she was giving mine away. One of the girls collapsed. Another ran. Clara had stayed. I wanted to understand, but the understanding is worse. The final lines were jagged, nearly illegible. I didn't lose my voice. It's still here. It just doesn't belong to me anymore. It waits, and when you listen, when you lean in, it feeds again. The last sentence. She's not in the walls. She is the breath between them. And below that, faint but deliberate. Do not read this aloud. Agnes folded the letter and placed it back beneath the board. She did not tell the others, because something in her chest had already quieted. That night, she dreamed of Clara. Not as a child, but as a shadow standing at the font, mouth open, no sound, and behind her, the echo. Not Clara's voice, but one shaped like it. Older, hungrier. In the morning, the hymnals were damp. The pews smelled of ash. And in the choir loft, a single note lingered, soft, rising, not from an instrument or throat, but from the rafters themselves. Agnes walked through the nave in silence, but her footsteps came back wrong, not louder, not softer. Too many. She reached the front pew and sat. Listened. No voices, but the faintest intake of breath. Behind her, she did not turn. She only whispered, I'm not singing today. And the sound did not echo, but it waited. Not all silence is stillness. Not all echoes fade. Some simply wait to be heard again. By 1972, the parsonage was no longer a place of worship. It was a hollowed-out relic. Charred walls, fractured stone, broken pews swallowed by moss. The town had voted quietly for its removal, not out of hatred, not out of closure, but discomfort. It was easier to forget when the bones were buried. Easier still when the ground above them was smooth. The demolition began in early August. Crew arrived from Harrisburg, 5 men, seasoned and sun-warm. They brought sledgehammers, pry bars, acetylene torches. They joked loudly the first morning, whistled as they worked, as if the echo of their laughter might force the place to flinch. It didn't. They cleared the outer wall first, where vines had wound through cracked mortar like veins too stubborn to die. Each stone resisted, not with force, but with weight, heavier than expected, soaked through with time. They found bones in the garden, not human, not quite animal, small, arranged in rings. They buried them again. No one came to bless the site. No clergy, no sisters, not even a town official. They worked alone until the 4th day, when they stopped, not from fatigue, not from decision. They simply stopped. The witness lived across the lane, a widow named Mrs. Elsie Grange. She was 79 and rarely left her front window. Her memory had faded in patches, but not that day. Not the shape of it. She said she saw them leave their tools in the grass, said they walked slowly, one after another, down the gravel path, toward the chapel. Not stumbling, not straying, like a procession, a march. They were singing, she said, only their mouths weren't open. The truck remained idling in the shade, its radio still playing faintly, a commercial jingle. For carpet cleaner, the tools were found untouched. Still warm. No one saw the men again. Their names: Richard Poe, Ellis Martin, Glenn Caro, Jacob Fields, and Neil Turner. A police report was filed. A search party formed. Dogs refused to enter the parsonage. Radios crackled and died on the steps. Flashlights dimmed faster inside than out. After 3 days, the official theory became desertion, disappearance by abandonment. No remains were found, only a scrap of cloth caught in the nail of the chapel doorframe. Torn flannel, dark with soot. Mrs. Grange insisted they had not run. They didn't look scared, she said. They looked. Called. No one listened. But Sister Agnes did. She was old now, quiet, no longer in robes. The church had changed. It always did. But some habits remained. Like how she visited the ruins once a year, on the day the bell had once rung backward. She came that week, though no one saw her enter. She carried a lantern and a small notebook, soft-bound, brittle at the corners. Inside were copied fragments of letters long since burned. She paused by the rusted gate, looked to the chapel, and whispered a name. Not Agatha dot, not Clara dot, her own dot, as she passed through the nave. She heard nothing dot, and then, under the soot, under the rot, something else dot humming dot too. Low to place, too soft to name, but familiar. She stepped into the vestry, found a pair of boot prints on the old stones, still wet, still fresh. They led not out, but down toward the hearth, where the brick had always seemed oddly colored, oddly placed. She pressed her hand to it, dot it opened dot, not with creak or cry, just gave way. Behind it, a stair, only 5 steps. Enough dot she didn't descend, she only stood, and listened. The humming was clearer now dot, and beneath it, breath, 5 voices, singing, mouths closed. Notes too soft to hear, too sharp to forget, she knew. Then, not where the men had gone, but how. She opened her notebook, turned to the final page dot, and wrote, she no longer needs the children. Only rhythm, only order, only breath. She feeds on return, on footfall, on routine. She lives now in the act of remembering. She paused dot, then added, and they sang, not because they knew the words, but because the silence was too late. She closed the book, placed it in the hollow where the hymnals used to sleep, and when she stepped back into the nave, the humming had stopped, but her breath carried it, barely, a single note. Caught between ribs, she did not hum, but something inside her echoed. Last lines? Tools can be dropped, names can be erased, but footsteps dot dot, remember, especially when they fall in time dot rain in Black Hollow, was not a gentle thing dot it did not wash. It did not lull. It returned like debt, collected in gutters, pressed against windows, sat thick in the soil, waiting to rise again. And when it came heavy, when the ground could no longer swallow what the sky kept giving, the parsonage breathed. That's what the locals said. They did not mean it poetically. The wood swelled. The plaster shifted. The stones, old and quarried from beneath the very hill the chapel stood on, bowed out, just slightly, like ribs beneath strain. The parsonage did not crumble. It expanded, then settled again. As if exhaling once the rain passed dot, no one stayed near it long enough to measure. But more than one person had heard it, a soft creaking beneath the storm. Not from wind, not from timber, but from within. A wet groan, a drawn breath, and then stillness dot in 1981. A schoolteacher, Miss Adeline Rourke, newly transferred from Fayette County, reported interference during her Sunday lesson preparation. She was recording cassette tapes for a phonics exercise. Using a small battery-powered recorder, she did not realize the tape had continued running after she left the room. When she returned, it had filled 7 minutes with static dot and something. Beneath the static, she played it back dot at first. She thought it was cross signal, a trucker's dispatch, a misfired AM broadcast dot. Then she heard the children, not laughter, not song dot recitation dot, in the clear cadence of classroom breath. Wages of sin is stillness. The mouth of God is full. The mouth of God is full. Then a pause, then again. The same phrase, slower this time, voices fraying at the ends, as though stretching around something too wide for speech. Miss Rourke did not finish the school year. She left the town with no forwarding address. Her cassette was left in the school drawer. It disappeared during inventory, but one custodian, James Heller, kept a note. He had transcribed the phrase from memory dot, and beneath it, in shaky pencil, the Voices didn't echo. They overlapped. Sister Agnes was in her 70s by then, her robes long replaced by simple wool, her presence in town treated with hushed respect, not for who she was, but what she remembered. She knew the phrase, not from the Bible, but from the margin of one of the sealed letters, scrawled sideways across the fold, barely legible, as if the writer had needed to hide it even from the page. She had once found it written in soap on the inside of a chapel window. The mouth of God is full. It was Clara who first whispered something similar, not as a phrase, but as an instinct. She's hungry in the breath. She'd written. Agnes thought then of the walls, not as shelter, but skin. The parsonage, when it swelled with rain, seemed to gather itself, not to break, but to hold. And the holding was the warning. In 1993, Father Leon, retired, near blind, known for muttering at windows, gave an interview to a local historian. When asked about the parsonage, he did not hesitate. That place was never holy, he said. It was a mouth. He said it as though saying anything else would be a lie. A mouth, he explained, doesn't need to speak. It only needs to receive. Hymns were not praises. They were pacifications. The prayers were not lifted upward. They were fed downward. He said this, then wept. And when asked what had once lived in that mouth, he only shook his head and whispered, not a demon, not a devil, a need. The tapes from that interview were archived. 6 months later, they warped beyond playback. Water damage. No leaks in the roof. Sister Agnes walked the chapel grounds. The following spring. It had been raining. The walls were distended again, not cracked, but full, like cheeks swelling before a cry. The air pressed close to the skin. Even the moss seemed to tremble. She placed her palm against the stone. It pulsed, not like blood, but like air, drawn deep, held. Waiting. She whispered a psalm, not out of belief, but memory. The wall didn't move, but the wood near the font creaked once, low and long, like someone shifting their weight on an unseen bench. Agnes stepped back. She did not leave. Not yet. She looked to the roofless steeple, the sky open above, and in the wind she heard it, a chorus, not song, not voice, but the shape of voice. An inhalation, drawn slow, hundreds of lungs remembering how to fill. She closed her eyes. She whispered one word, enough. The echo that returned was not hers. It was smaller. Childlike. And very, very close. Rain washes, wind carries, but breath remains. And when the walls swell, they are not struggling. They are preparing to speak. There was no key. No latch. No map. Only the knowledge that something beneath the choir loft had been hidden, not locked away in shame, but in silence. Not to be forgotten, but to wait. Sister Agnes found it not through discovery, but remembering. It came in a dream. The corridor, behind the organ, where dust gathered in even layers, where no child had ever been told to clean. The stairs there were uneven, angled slightly off, as if unsure whether they led upward or downward. She followed them with a lantern. Each step sounded wrong, not hollow, not solid, like walking across memory softened by grief. When she reached the small door at the end, she expected resistance, but it opened like a breath. No scrape, no hinge, just the sound of something letting go. Inside, there was no dust, no rot, no time. The walls were bare stone, the floor smooth, the ceiling arched low like a held breath. And at the center, the pulpit. It was not wood. It was not built. It was assembled. Tibias for spines, radius bones for rails, vertebrae stacked with prayerful precision, each one not nailed, but fitted, child-sized, too small to be adult, too numerous to belong to only one. Agnes did not count them. She could not. The base was round, a circle of skulls. Their crowns cracked, not by age, but by pressure. And atop it all, at shoulder height, was a slanted panel of blackened iron, like a lectern pulled from a furnace. Charred, warped, yet cool beneath her fingers. Upon it, a single page, not bound, not laid. Placed. It was not ash, but something older parchment darkened not by fire, but by being heard. She read the words once. They were not long. Blessed are the voiceless, for they carry me. Nothing more. But behind the phrase, behind, the shape of it, came weight. Not sorrow, not reverence, but presence, like someone leaning in to speak, too close to see. Agnes backed away. Her hand trembled. The lantern dimmed, then flared, and in its light she saw the walls for what they were, not plain stone, but etched. Dozens, no, hundreds of markings, faint but deliberate. Not symbols, not drawings. Names, not too many to read, too small to forget. Some she recognized, first names only, from the marklings, from the lost. Others, not born in this century. Each name was carved with care, not gouged, as if someone had whispered them into the wall and let the stone remember. But no name said Agatha. Not once, not hidden, not miswritten. She had been erased, or never etched. To begin with, this room was not her tomb. It was her mouth, not to house her, but to speak her. Sermons are meant to be delivered. And this pulpit had been used. Agnes could feel it in the floor, the way her feet sank slightly, as though standing in the memory of hundreds who had listened and never left. She stepped back. The lantern flickered again, and the page on the lectern curled at the edges. It did not crumble. It did not vanish. It burned slowly. From the inside, no flame, no heat. Just unmaking. The phrase dimmed. The parchment blackened, but no ash fell. The words lingered, even when unread. She turned. The door remained open, but her way back felt longer. Each step carried the echo of her name, not spoken, not called. Just thought. By something else. She reached the choir loft and paused. The air had changed. Behind her, the stone room had gone still again, as if it had never been opened. She did not return. She told no one. But weeks later, the stone at the chapel's foundation began to flake, just a little. And beneath it, faint as breath, a name began to show. Not Agatha. Agnes. Only once. Only small, but clear. And beneath it, one phrase, carved too thin to be seen without kneeling. Those who carry silence are never truly still. Some pulpits rise from altars, others rise from bone, and some sermons were never meant to end. They tore the parsonage down in the spring of 1908. There was no announcement, no ceremony, just trucks, machines, and a quiet weekday when the town's attention had turned elsewhere, toward elections, repairs, the coming tourist season. It happened quickly, almost as if it had been planned to leave no time for protest. The machines came early. They left before dusk. No stone remained, no timber stacked. The foundation was filled in, padded flat, seeded with grass. It never grew. The town forgot slowly, as it always does with places that do not stay gone. They built nothing on the lot, not out of reverence, but hesitance. Plans came and went. A new library, a war memorial, even a parking lot for the nearby trail. But each time the surveyors visited, something stopped the process. Compass needles spun. Batteries drained. Blueprints went missing. And so the lot remained. A wound filled in, but not healed. No bird sang there. The air above it never stirred. Even dogs, who sniffed and roamed freely elsewhere, skirted the perimeter without prompting. Ears pressed flat, tails low. The townspeople didn't speak of it, but they all knew. They walked on the other side of the road. They didn't let their children play near it. And no one walked past it after sundown. Sister Agnes lived to see the ground flatten dot. She stood across the road, her hands clasped behind her back, watching as the machines groaned through decades of breath-soaked rot. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She only whispered, "You'll remember yourself, even when they forget." And the earth did dot the first dawn it happened. It was Miss Darla Jenkins who heard it, the mail carrier, up before the sun, delivering newspapers bundled in plastic. She paused at the foot of her route, turned toward the empty lot, and cocked her head. A sound, not loud, not sharp, but rising, a girl's voice, not singing, not speaking, just humming. Wordless, clear, too clear to be wind. She turned away, told no one. But she started delivering that side of town last. A month later, a jogger heard it too, right before sunrise, headphones dead, pulse rising. He swore it came from under his feet. Like a voice trapped in water, he said. They didn't compare notes. But the town began to shift around the lot again, not outwardly, not with fences or signs. Just the slow turning of bodies away from breath they didn't want to recognize. The soil remained bare, not cracked, not sunken, just unwilling. Even weeds refused it. The grass planted that first spring never rooted. Trees leaned away. The shade over it was neither full nor empty. It simply was in the archives of Black Hollow. The lot is still listed as a municipal open space, but beneath the records, in faded handwriting at the margin of the ledger, someone once wrote, "Ground, unsettled, voice present." Sister Agnes passed the following winter. Her notebook, soft-bound and wrapped in cloth, was found beside her bed. Inside, her final entry. It was never about the chapel, or the rites, or even the children. It was about what gathers in silence. When silence is made sacred, she had drawn no maps, named no names. Only one phrase stood alone, circled twice. She is no longer waiting. She is being remembered. They buried Agnes in the hillside cemetery. No marble, just stone. And on mornings just before the sun breaks, when the fog has not yet lifted from the grass, a voice sometimes returns, faint, not calling, not asking. Just humming. Rising slowly, like steam from cooling breath. It lasts less than a minute. No one dares speak during it. No one records it. But all who hear it say the same. The voice does not echo, because it knows this place. It once lived here, and what lived here was heard. They built nothing. But the ground remembers. It listens still. And in the hour before birdsong, a girl still sings without words.